Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Woodside, Executive Director of the National Association for Music Education, and I am delighted to welcome you to Empowering Teachers to Advocate for Federal and State Arts Education Policy, a presentation of the brand new Arts Education Alliance. And I just want to take a moment here at the top of the presentation. First of all, thank you all for attending on behalf of myself and my colleagues, who you'll hear from this evening, but also to recognize what a momentous occasion this is, that the arts education community is coming together via the 5 professional associations represented on your screen right now in support of a national arts education policy agenda. We are just so thrilled to be working together in this capacity. I've been around long enough to know that this wasn't always the way the work was done. And though there are definitely places across the country where the discipline areas work very closely together, there are also areas where we would like to see that happen more. And we're hoping that by modeling these actions at the national level and collaborating in support of all the arts disciplines, advocating for all the arts disciplines in federal law, we will be able to have a trickle effect down across the country and see that kind of work mirrored in states and jurisdictions and communities all across the United States. And I just can't stress enough how thrilled all of us are to be embarking on this journey together and thinking about the future and all the potential ways that we can collaborate in support of arts education policy goals for the good of children and teachers. So, on that note, if we could flip the slide, please. I'm going to speak briefly to you about the work of the National Association for Music Education, and you'll hear a little bit from each of us about the organizations that we represent, and then how this all comes together, again, in this wonderful unified vision. So what you see on your screen now is a visual representation of the NAfME strategic plan. And we're so proud at the National Association for Music Education that the strategic plan of NAfME is all framed through what we call the keystone of equity in music education. So you see the work represented on the screen: advocacy and public policy, which we're talking about tonight, professional learning and growth, and research in music teacher education. These are the big pillars of the strategic work of NAfME. They all come together under this mission of NAfME being a collaborative community supporting music educators and advocating for equitable access to music education. And I think what you're going to find in hearing from my colleagues tonight is that all of our organizations reflect these same types of values. And that's what makes it such a natural fit for us to come together with a unified public policy agenda that is supporting equitable access to arts education. So what I can tell you just at a 40,000-foot level very quickly is that I have never been prouder to work for NAfME and represent music teachers who believe in this mission, believe in this belief statement that you see in front of you, and are embarking on this work that is the national work, again, reflected through 50 plus organizations at the state level that support music education and that are affiliated with NAfME to make sure that all students have access to equitable music education and that teachers have the resources to ensure that it's being taught in schools. So proud to be here. So delighted to be part of this coalition and grateful that you could all be here to hear from us and ask questions tonight. And I'll turn it to my colleagues. Thank you.
There. I'm Susan McGreevy-Nichols, and I am the Executive Director, CEO of the National Dance Education Organization. In 2022, NDEO worked with Maryland nonprofits to create a 5-year strategic plan with 4 strategic priorities. Strategic priority number 4 is strengthening advocacy for dance education at the local, state, and national levels. NAfME's offer to bring us together was very generous. They already had lobbyists working for them and a staff position which oversees the advocacy efforts. Because of this partnership with NAfME and the other arts organization, we are ready to check goal number 1 off. Of course, we still have a lot to do, and all this working is ongoing. It is extremely important to a small organization like NDEO to be a part of a larger group. Having a message go out with 1 logo on the stationery is fine, but having 5 logos working together is a lot more impressive, and people will listen. Advocacy is important, as I've said, at the national, state, regional, and local levels. It is more than Arts Advocacy Day. For example, we have a lot of private dance studios that are part of our membership. And one of the things I like to tell them to think about in terms of advocacy is to use it, to think of it as a form of marketing. And they understand marketing. That's what they do. They sell their programs, but they are also selling the value of dance and dance education and why it is important to students as a learner. It is particularly important to educate your students about the value of dance education and their parents, as well as the community. All this is important grassroots advocacy. I'll turn it over to our next person. Thank you.
Hi, it's Jen Katona. It's not, oh, wait, let me go here. Sorry, I apologize. 2 years on Zoom and we're still having technical issues. Good evening, everybody. I'm Jen Katona. I'm the Executive Director of the Educational Theater Association and want to echo Chris's thank you to all of you for being here on a Tuesday evening, which I am sure if you are a theater educator or another arts educator, you are squishing this in between school and rehearsals and your own families perhaps and getting ready for tomorrow. So really do understand and appreciate your support of this evening. I won't say much more. Our vision and our mission is up on the screen. Educational Theater Association last year also went through a strategic planning process, which speaks to Chris's earlier statement that the synergy among the 5 organizations is really beyond just the 5 leaders, but that all 5 organizations have come to notice and realize that we all want the same thing for our students and ultimately for our educators. And so it's been a real delight in seeing how our 5 strategic plans are coming into an alignment. Our third strategic pillar is also around advocacy efforts. When we think about that in 3 ways, one is at the federal level through alliances with our 5 partners here and working with Amanda and her team, who you'll hear from in just a moment. And the second is at the state level. And as Chris said, modeling the idea that the arts are stronger when they're together. And so we have repurposed our advocacy leadership network to really be from the state level up and tell us what the individual needs of the states are, and then how can the Educational Theater Association support those with the resources that are necessary and needed. And then pulling on the support of the other arts organizations to make sure that you're having that holistic support that you need at your state level. And then to echo Susan's point, the real advocacy work is done in the classrooms, in the district offices, in the principal's offices, in the Board of Ed meetings. And so what are those supports that you need from your national association to reinforce the work and the importance of the work? For EdTA, unfortunately, a lot of our work revolves around censorship and schools being shut down, not schools, school plays being shut down for various reasons. And so how can we support the educators as they support their students and families through those efforts? So advocacy looks a lot of different ways for all of the arts organizations, and it's nice to have the full spectrum here this evening and the full support. So I will pass it on now to Dane from our Media Arts.
Thanks so much, Dan. I think even more than the other arts organizations, Media Arts Education, NAMAE, National Association, is very appreciative to be here and gratified with the support that we've received from our partners in arts education. We wouldn't be here without them, of course, and we look forward to very close, tight collaboration in our efforts to move arts education forward. As you can see, we have our vision and mission, and we have to echo the others in terms of how we want to bring standards-based media arts education for all learners, and we do mean all in that sense. There needs to be more access, equity for all students. I think everybody can agree on that. In that sense, Media Arts is very new nonprofit. We just incorporated in January of this year. So we're very much a startup organization. And so we have very basic goals in terms of just forming this organization, outreach to the community, really connecting that community, empowering them with the knowledge of what media arts education is. So we have sort of a foundation of common understanding that we can build on, because media arts is an emerging content discipline in that sense, changing dynamically, growing within our society, becoming more and more prominent and important for our students as well. So content is necessary to inform everyone, get everybody on the same page, and also research what's going on with the discipline everywhere. And then with advocacy, of course, so that states understand what this is, districts understand, and we can get the support to move the discipline forward along with research and development. So again, we're very grateful to be here working with our partners and look forward to a great future in that sense, and supporting students and educators with the power of advocacy for arts education. With that, I'd like to hand it off to my friend and partner, Mario Rosero.
Great, thank you, Dane. Well, everybody, as you can hear, we know that a dance, media arts, music, theater, and visual arts education is essential to every young person's journey as they learn from the earliest years to the latest. And we are really here tonight to uplift your good work and your voices. And through this unique moment in time, we can amplify our collective voices for the greatest impact. I'm Mario Rosero. I'm the Executive Director of the National Art Education Association. It's a great privilege and honor to be here with my colleagues. We're standing side by side, locked arms to support arts education across the board. At NAEA, like my colleagues, you'll hear themes throughout, but the bedrock of our work, our North Star, is really around our strategy that is in place to support our visual arts educators and their learners with that super pillar of ours around equity, diversity, inclusion. We have a real commitment to ensuring that all young people are recognized for who they are as they step through the threshold of every classroom and every school, and also that we're welcoming in our arts educators from the diversity of the community across the US and beyond. Of course, learning, research, and knowledge are part of our ethos. Tonight's focus around advocacy and policy, and then this vibrant community. So I am really thrilled to join colleagues, and I'm going to go ahead and pivot us to the next couple slides here. And we invite you to consider, you're going to see 3 different images, and we're going to leave them up long enough that you can scan the QR codes to go to the source documents. But part of the work in this alliance is really to ask our art educators on the ground in the field, as you are working to champion your programs, to share your stories, to really work towards that greater impact. It's always helpful to think about where your partners and allies are and who your audience might be that's a decision maker for change. So we're going to see this information in a couple different ways. This one is framed as tiers of influence. So you can see the federal, state, local with the student focus there. What I draw attention to is that as you look across each of these horizontal blocks, the arrows are going both up and down. So what we're saying is that the traffic towards the audience that you're working with to either help share your message or for the message to reach, it moves in different patterns, right? And so depending on what you're trying to affect, if I'm a teacher in a classroom trying to affect graduation requirements, I'm trying to affect minutes of instruction, I'm trying to affect resources, that might be more at the local level with my school board, with my principal. If we're thinking about larger statewide efforts, I may have to join forces with neighboring districts, with a state arts alliance or other colleagues or allies, and really work through the legislature, through the State Department of Education. And of course, Federal is really where the nationals spend most of our time working on language, on policy, on advocacy efforts, and connecting with our leadership to make sure that those largest policies will benefit the most young people in classrooms. So we're going to go ahead and look at the next slide, which frames this a little differently. And I think we all have a tendency to, we're fond of this one because of the focus of the students right at the center, which is the heart of our work. But really think about those ripples of influence where, you know, is it my peer-to-peer teaching community? Is it the parents in my PTO? Is it the school board? Who are those elected officials that I might be able to get in touch with? How can I show them the pride that arts education provides for a community or a young person? And then how does that align to federal grants, federal legislation, et cetera? So hopefully you got a chance to scan this QR code as well. This is just to contextualize the work before we get into greater detail. And one more slide, please. And then we always like to touch upon this, and I think this shared endeavor document that was created across all art forms from national colleagues, it continues to evolve. We know it's not a static idea, but when we think about arts education for all students, we know that this is an endeavor that doesn't just rest in one person's hands. It doesn't rest in one type of arts educator. It really takes a community or an ecosystem to do this, and that's partly why we're here tonight. But we know that within a school frame, we love and we celebrate and we're here to support our certified arts educators who have all that training and background and support and all that knowledge that they're resting upon, all that research. And there's so much great value because they're part of the school community, they're part of the staff, they're embedded, they see students across the entire year, across grade levels, they know families, and they know generations, right? But we also have our certified non-arts educators, our community-based arts educators that are really powerful allies that might be coming from a practitioner lens, coming from a museum or cultural institution, and they might highlight or help us expand on our knowledge or go deeper. And that can look different. And they might be visiting non-arts classrooms. And then our classroom non-arts educators who have a passion for and love embedding the arts in their classrooms, and maybe that's arts integration. However, I may not have covered all the bases, but however that plays out, when you look at the Venn diagram, you can see how students benefit from each different kind of provider or provision, and that really to reach every student in our system, it often requires a collaboration across all these entities and more. So we just like to bring this up, and this is also something that we're thinking about updating and revising, so we're happy to receive feedback on that in the chat. My segment for this moment is come to a close, and I'm happy to hand over the reins to Amanda. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mario, and hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Karhuse. I'm the Assistant Executive Director for Advocacy and Public Policy for NAfME. I'm really excited to be leading this advocacy collaboration on behalf of all dance, media arts, music, theater, and visual arts educators. And I first wanted to quickly introduce you to my team because I cannot do this work on my own. Zachary Keita and I are both registered lobbyists. He supports me in some of our coalition work at the federal level. He also writes most of our blog posts and advocacy campaigns, so you'll become very familiar with his work soon. And Jasmine A. Sutton, who supports our state affiliates and their state level strategy work. She often meets with them to discuss strategy, sets up advocacy campaigns targeting state legislators and state boards of education. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk quickly about the federal role in education policy. And while most education decisions are made at the state and district level, the federal role really is to ensure that educational equity and excellence is a reality for all students. And what happens at the federal level can be very influential about what decisions states and districts make in education moving forward. Next slide. So hopefully many of you are familiar with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It was first passed in 1965, along with a number of other civil rights laws, and it outlines broad requirements related to standards, assessments, and accountability. But decisions about curriculum, about teacher licensure and certification are still made at the state and then district level. The most recent version of ESEA is known as the Every Student Succeeds Act, and it passed back in 2015. And it's important for our conversation tonight because it really shifted the conversation and the language in federal law from core academic subjects to a well-rounded education. And as you can see, if you read the fine print on this slide, the arts and music are both listed as part of the definition of a well-rounded education. And this means that federal funds under Titles 1, 2, and 4A under ESSA can be used to support a well-rounded education that includes music and the arts. Next slide. So there are a number of federal programs that can be used to support arts education. I'm going to focus on just a few. Title I, which provides funds for schools serving a high population of low-income students. Title II, which supports teacher preparation and job-specific professional development. Title IV-A, which can be used to support a well-rounded education, safe and healthy schools, and also the effective use of technology. And then the Assistance for Arts Education program, which is a competitive grant program that promotes arts education through professional development, instructional materials, and arts-based education programming. And many of you who are members of our organizations might be familiar with the Connected Arts Network, which is funded through the Assistance for Arts Education program. And then last but not least is the Nittany 21st Century Community Learning Centers, and those are funds that can be used to support after-school programs. Next slide, please. So every fall since I have been at NAfME, the national arts organizations have collaborated with the NAMAE Foundation to learn how federal funds have been used to support their programs. The report for the 2022-23 school year was released last December. And at that time, only 42% of our respondents said that they had received federal funds for music and the arts. And most of them were using that money to purchase instruments, art supplies, and instructional materials for their classrooms. Next slide, please. So it's important to note that roughly 29% of respondents who were able to use federal funds for their arts programs used COVID relief or the ESSER funding for their programs. Some schools were able to use the ESSER funding to increase staffing, which allowed more students to participate and to ensure that arts educators didn't have to teach at multiple schools. Other schools were able to use the ESSER funding to provide content-specific professional development and offer summer enrichment opportunities in music and the arts. The ESSER funds have to be obligated by districts by the end of this month. And while some extensions have been granted, the vast majority of schools are not going to have this funding source in the current school year. And we heard that in our survey data last year, that they had already been told a year ago that, to not expect that funding for the 24-25 school year. Surprisingly, Title I was the second most cited funding source, and that was often in combination with the ESSER funds. Again, many schools were using that funding to purchase instruments and other supplies so that students wouldn't have to share them in the classroom. They also upgraded performance facilities and offered summer camps and after-school choral and visual arts programs. Title IV-A was cited less frequently than it has been in previous surveys. And I think this is because we have, I'm part of the Title IV-A coalition that also does surveys of school districts on the use of funds every year. And we found that a lot of districts are using that funding to support a well-rounded education, but they're using it to support social and emotional learning and also provide mental health resources that are so important for students who are still recovering from the pandemic. I will share that the survey for the 2023-24 school year was just released yesterday. It'll be open through October 18th, and we will be sure to send a follow-up email to all of you with the link and ask that you share it widely with your school districts and include them, encourage them to respond so that we have good data going into the next appropriations season. Next slide, please. So I mentioned appropriations, and without the ESSER funds being available this school year, schools are going to be more reliant on some of that title funding and state and local funding to support their arts programs. So this chart shows where things currently stand in Congress. Both the House and Senate Appropriations Committees have approved their bills for FY 2025. They did that over the summer before the August recess. And you can see that they took a very different approach to how they address our priorities. The House bill would cut education funding by $11 billion compared to FY 2024, and this would be really devastating on top of the loss of the ESSER funding. You can see in the far right column that there'd be a massive cut to Title I and the complete elimination of Title II and the Assistance for Arts Education program. And in the Appropriations Committee report that accompanied the bill, they stated their belief that, and I'm quoting here, considering the continued decline of public school performance and student achievement across the country, funding provided by the department should be focused on core education, such as reading, writing, and math. I'll let you just sit with that for a second. So in response, all of our organizations have been reaching out to our congressional champions in the House and Senate. Obviously, we had much better numbers out of the Senate. Senate Appropriations staff was sort of horrified when I pointed out the report language to them. And we're activating our grassroots network to contact their members of Congress. Next slide, please. So this is your turn to take action during the webinar. I'll pause on this slide for just a moment to give you time to take out your phones and click on the QR code on this screen. I think somebody from the NAEA staff will also share the link in the chat at some point this evening. But this link will take you to our Grassroots Action Center, where you can send a personalized message to your members of Congress, urging them to oppose the bill when it's on the House floor. I will mention Congress has not passed all 11 appropriations bills before the October 1st deadline since 1997. And they're not going to do so this year either. They definitely will need to pass what's known as a continuing resolution or a CR to avoid a government shutdown. The House has released a bill this week that would extend funding through March 2025 and hope to bring it to the floor tomorrow. But we are already hearing that there's been pushback from both Democrats and Republicans in the House. And the Senate has already expressed opposition to that proposal, and the White House has already threatened to veto such a proposal. So they would all prefer a CR that just extends funding until after the November election, and feel strongly that the final appropriations bill should be enacted before the end of this Congress. So they have 3 weeks to get what we refer to as a clean CR passed before that October 1st deadline. Next slide, please. So in addition to appropriations, there have been a number of bills reintroduced this year to improve access to arts education. They include the Arts and Education Act and the Guarantee Access to Arts and Music Education Act, which were both introduced by our congressional champions. Also this year, Congresswoman Kamala Gerdove introduced new legislation to create a competitive grant program to support the arts and arts education at HBCUs and other MSIs. And all of the organizations you see on the screen today and some of our other partner national ed organizations did work with the Congresswoman's staff to make sure that the grant funding could be used to support students who are in their arts education preparation programs. That money could be used for stipends for them to participate in their student teaching, that we could be providing mentoring and additional support for them, and actually be providing stipends for the mentors and some training for the mentors of those arts soon-to-be arts educators. So we're really excited to see this collaboration start even before the Alliance officially launched. I'll mention too that a new bill was released earlier this year by Congressman David Scott from Georgia that would provide professional development opportunities for music and arts teachers to better support students with disabilities in the classroom. And this was really exciting because the idea for the bill actually came out of the NAfME Hill Day. We had a number of music educators meeting with their members of Congress back in June 2023. And some Georgia music educators met with the Congresswoman and shared that a district was using their Title IV funds to support students with disabilities in the music and arts classroom. And they loved the idea and wanted to create a new competitive grant to make sure that more districts were supporting those students and making their classrooms more inclusive. You can flip to the next slide. We have a couple of other policy priorities that, again, our organizations work on collaboratively, but also with some other national music and arts organizations. So we are all members of the National Coalition for Art Standards, or NCAS. NCAS received a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts last year to review the 2014 art standards through a lens of equity. And there's currently a cohort of teachers who'll be using new guidance to create lesson plans for their classroom this fall. And actually, the entire NCAS coalition will be meeting later this week for an in-person retreat to develop a timeline and process for a larger review and revision of the 2014 standards. And we expect to share more details about that later this year. Another issue that our organizations have been working on collaboratively is reinstatement of the arts NAEP assessments, which were removed from the schedule back in 2019. And we're also hoping to improve data collection on arts access and participation. And many of us are members of the Arts Education Partnership, which does have a data working group providing some recommendations to the Department of Ed, the NEA, and others on how we can improve data collection in arts education. The last time the federal government collected this data was through the Fast Response Statistical Survey, and that data was for the 2009-2010 school year. And at that time, it found that schools with a higher concentration of students in poverty were less likely to offer arts education. And I know we have other nonprofit partners who are sharing that kind of similar information about access and participation across the country. So there is a possibility that Congress may resume work on reauthorization of the Education Sciences Reform Act this year. We did submit recommendations on that bill's reauthorization last year, hoping to reinstate the NAEP arts assessment and also resume data collection on arts participation and access. Next slide, please. Our organizations are also very concerned about teacher shortages and how that may impact student opportunities to participate in arts courses. Both NAfME and NAEA released reports within the past year and a half. And if you read them side by side, you'll see that music and art face many of the same challenges. And we share a lot of ideas on recruitment, support, mentoring, and how we can make education an attractive career. We also have a similar policy agenda that's focused on funding for mentoring and content-specific professional development, increased salaries and other financial incentives for teachers, and scholarships and grants to support student teachers. And I'll mention that EdTA is also exploring factors related to teacher recruitment and has created a new mentoring program. So there have been some bills introduced at the federal level that NAfME has supported, and I know that this will be a new area of focus for all of the organizations as we continue this collaborative work. Next slide, please. So with my remaining time, I'm going to focus on a few state policy issues and some action that you all can take as state leaders. Next slide. So my team and I do not lobby at the state level, but we do have a network of music education advocates that we refer to fondly as ELF, our Advocacy Leadership Force, and they meet monthly and share their challenges and success stories. So these are just two examples of bills that have passed this year. In Rhode Island, you can see that they're focused on data collection and transparency about student enrollment in arts classes. And they wanted to ensure that there's a full-time staff person focused on arts education at the State Department of Education. And in Florida, They've created a new seal of fine arts for students who have earned a standard high school diploma and completed at least 3 courses in dance, music, theater, or visual arts. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, there's also been some lowlights this year. In Oklahoma, they revised their high school graduation requirements to remove the credit for arts education, essentially removing arts education and world languages as mandatory courses. And I know that there's a similar proposal has also popped up in Indiana, although this one is going through the State Board of Education, not the state legislature. But I will say that in Oklahoma, before the final bill passed, my team worked with our state leaders to develop an advocacy campaign that resulted in more than 5,200 messages being sent to the state legislature in opposition to the proposal. Unfortunately, the governor did still sign the bill into law in May, but we are already working with our Oklahoma Music Education Association leaders, and I know they're collaborating with their dance, media arts, visual arts, and theater educators as well to see if we can get a champion in the Oklahoma legislature to get the graduation requirements amended again. I'll mention this one's a little bit, we were reactive at first, but it became more of a positive, was an issue that arose earlier in this California, where you may know Prop 28 passed 2 years ago, providing new funding for arts education. But schools have found it challenging to find certified arts teachers to fill all of the open positions. So the governor had proposed a new CTE, or Career and Technical Education, certification for elementary music and arts teachers. I know that our state affiliate in California was very vocal in opposition to that plan. Again, they worked with my team to set up multiple advocacy campaigns, and they did that in coalition with the California Dance, Theater, and Visual Arts organizations. So we were really excited to see that the grassroots advocacy in California actually pushed them to amend that proposal. We found out in July that the bill did remove the CTE authorization, but it did include some language to allow for flexibility for teaching artists and also arts educators from other states to meet California's state certification requirements. And our organizations were all in support of those changes. So great to see that work. Next slide, please. So for those of you who are thinking about policy and what you can be doing as proactive advocates in your states, I just want to share that ArtScan is a really great resource. Again, this comes from the Arts Education Partnership. And the At a Glance document provides an overview of various policies, including standards, instructional time, graduation requirements. You can see how your state compares to others. And you can also look up state-specific reports that include the specific language that's found in state statute or code. So if you are working on a bill or a policy proposal, you can look at another state's exact statute language and try and get a legislator to introduce that in your own state. Next slide, please. So what can state leaders do? I really think that the most important aspect of advocacy is building these relationships before you have an ask. And it's really important to be proactive in making some of those connections with decision makers. So these are just some ideas that my team has brainstormed about how you can get arts education in front of various audiences. Certainly you want to be collecting data on student access to and participation in arts courses. You can find out if your state is one of many that participates in the Arts Education Data Project. They have dashboards that can give that information and drill down to the district level to see kind of where there might be gaps within your state. We recommend showcasing student art performances in your state capital. I know many of our MEAs bring musicians to the state capitol during Music in Our Schools Month. So exploring different opportunities for how you can be showcasing work in the Capitol and just getting them familiar with your organization. Again, I recommend going to ArtScan and reviewing your state's current policies and just seeing where maybe there are some opportunities for proactive advocacy. I think I saw, just kind of looking through the participant list, that we have a number of our C-Day representatives with us on the webinar tonight. So if you do not know the C-Day representative in your state, and these are the folks at the State Department of Education who oversee arts education, please become familiar with them, get to know them, invite them to your conferences and events. Also establish a relationship with your state arts council. We recommend inviting state policymakers to your state conferences, maybe even create an Arts Education Champion Award for legislators. Often when they receive a award, they're more likely to attend those events and have a speaking role as well. We really do want to encourage partnerships with all of the art forms working together within your state, and make sure that you're offering opportunities for your members to advocate. So I know many of the state level organizations have advocacy days similar to how we go up to Capitol Hill annually, and it'd be great to see everybody doing that together. Next slide, please. So when my team meets with state leaders and talk about strategy, we often ask them to reflect on this question: what do you envision for arts education in your state 5 or 10 years from now? And then we've put together sort of an easy to follow roadmap on the steps you might need to take to develop and implement a plan. But as I've mentioned, my team is always happy to meet with you and strategize together. And as Chris mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, we really do hope that this new partnership at the national level is going to encourage more state coalitions in arts advocacy as well. So we're here to assist and make that a reality. So with that, that is the end of our formal presentation, but I think the rest of my colleagues are going to come back on the screen and we have some time for Q&A.
Great job, Amanda. Thanks for covering all those details. And just to reiterate for everybody, the deck and the recording will be available in a post-event email to everyone, so you'll have access to these. So if you didn't catch any of the links or QR codes, you'll have access to those after this session. So I see that the Q&A has been very active. We've been trying to address questions as they come up. I'm happy to jump in here and throw them out to the group. The first one that came up was, I'm at a Title I school. How do I get funding for my art program to bring 21st century technology into the visual arts program? Well, I'd say, first of all, Title I funding is available to support technology in your classroom, and you can make the case to decision makers for that. It has been stated that Title I is allowable to spend on arts education. That has been stated before. We've been working to get an updated message around that, but it is allowable. Colleagues, any other resources we might highlight for that?
I would just recommend first to start as local as possible, having a conversation with your principal, maybe getting him or her on your side to then talk to the folks at the district level who oversee the federal funding, just to get that conversation started. But yes, we definitely have resources we can share if there are any questions or confusion about whether Title I can be used to support your program and whether some of the specific needs you have are an allowable use of funds.
So I have a just a strategy that you, as a arts education teacher, one thing about federal money is if you don't spend it, you have to give it back. So I always encourage my members, and back when I was teaching at Roger Williams Middle School in Providence, Rhode Island, I always had a requisition ready to go. So when our federal program guy asked me, he knew I could give him it immediately, and I got the money. So you have to, have to know that and start. That's a little thing that is a big thing, because we're talking a lot of money that gets sent back because people just don't get around to it.
We love a brass tacks solution. That's a great recommendation. I think another one that is often helpful is sit on your school leadership team and input into the school improvement plan, the SIP, and ensure that the priorities address the arts. And if they address the arts and technology, that's what guides the school budget and decision making. So every arts educator should make sure that they have a representative on that school improvement planning team. I'm going to jump around a little bit. There was a question on ESSER funds. How can you tell if ESSER funds are available in your county or state?
I would say they're probably not. It's a little bit challenging because it's not until the money has been obligated and all invoices been signed and money goes out the door that it's really showing up on records at the school level, to the district, to the state, to the federal Department of Education. And so that's why there's been sort of this, not misunderstanding, but assumption that there are more funds available than actually exists. But I think most principals and superintendents knew the timeline they were operating under. We've been saying for years since the legislation passed that that money had to be obligated by September 2024. And so I would suggest at this point in time, it's too late, but you can try reaching out again to that person at the district level who oversees federal funds and see if anything is left. But I would encourage you to call them tomorrow.
I would, in the spirit of brass tacks, oftentimes, if you, as Susan said, if you have your list of, or your wish item, and you go to whomever it is that oversees the funding, and allow them to decide where the funding source can come from, because sometimes they might have 2,000 in this fund or 3,000 in that fund, and they can use those funds. But the key piece is for you to be informed that the money can be spent. So Title I can be spent for arts education. Title IV can be spent for arts education. Title II can be spent for professional development. ESSER funds can be spent for arts education. Once they kind of have that green light, then they'll figure out on the back end how to fund that for you. But I would stay consistent in what you're asking for, and then up to date on what is allowable, and let them figure it out on the back end how exactly they're going to fund it for you.
And to that point, Meg submitted a question about where she could find information that details exactly what Title I funds can be used for within schools.
State by state, isn't it?
The law is pretty flexible when it says well-rounded education, that can really include almost anything in the arts. The Department of Ed has put out guidance and examples in the past, and I know I'd have to search down the link, but they do have, for the Assistance for Arts Education program, a new website that launched earlier this year that highlights some examples too. But purchasing instruments, purchasing instructional supplies, professional development. I mean, really a lot of it is allowable. Funding for field trips, for enrichment opportunities for high needs students. I mean, there are many different ways that funding could be used to support arts education. It has to be sort of aligned to your state's ESSA plan and the priorities of your school, but I think you can find ways to demonstrate the need and how it's helping to engage kids in the classroom, going to reduce those chronic absenteeism rates, and just have the kids happier and performing better in school.
Yeah, and I would say now is the time, if your state is a Title I, or if your district is a Title I district, the state funding is usually, those grants are being written right now. So if you can get in on why and how they're spending the money. So sometimes they might say Title I funding can't be used for X, Y, and Z because it wasn't in this year's description of how your district is planning to use the funds, but it doesn't mean it can't be in the next year's. But now is usually the time when they're writing those to the state on how they plan to use their funds.
And they also have to do a final report at the end of the year. And I think that's something that you should try to get a hold of, to find out what the district did actually use the money for. it'll give you ideas.
Looking across the question, we did, it's been replied to, but there was a question around creating a district-wide plan for the arts and resources that are available. And the response was there are these documents called the Opportunity to Learn Standards, which sort of outline the sort of essential infrastructure for a program across art forms. So I know that dance, music, theater, and visual arts have those. Dane, I am pretty confident, would be happy to help you think through those. His organization would be happy to do that. As a newer organization, may not have those in place already, but I bet that he would be more than happy to walk through those. But those are available from each of the art form associations. There was
an
a
example of how we're working together and collaborating, and why we're grateful to be here to rely on our larger, older sisters in the arts.
Amanda, there was a question from Becky around where we can look up the data that drills down to the district level. I don't know if you mentioned that specific resource.
On arts access and participation. So there are states that are participating in the Arts Education Data Project. And that's a partnership between Quadrant Research and CDA. And there are quite a few. I think almost half the states in the country right now are participating in that project. And so there are state dashboards that when you go into it, you can drill down, you can look it up by discipline, you can look it up by your district, you can look it up by different student subgroups, and really find a wealth of data there. For other states, I would probably recommend outreach to your CDA member as a starting point, and then maybe they can help you. Because all the states have the data, it's just accessing it and making it usable for the average educator is always the challenge.
Ray, if you're able to pop that link into the chat for everybody for the Arts Ed Data Project, that would be appreciated. I'm trying to make sure we cover all the bases here. I know Clyde is one of my members for NAEA, and we had an exchange earlier this week with Amanda and her team around graduation requirements. And his question is, can the panel share any insight into the consequences of removing fine arts electives from high school graduation requirements? In Indiana, they're facing the process of removing those electives as a requirement for high school graduation. And maybe it's not just the consequences, but any strategies to help address that, if anybody has any insight.
I mean, I don't know what research has been done to date on states that maybe have removed it as a requirement and how that's impacted course offerings and opportunities for kids. Like I said, in Oklahoma, we're exploring the option of introducing legislation to try and get the fine arts credit reinserted. I think it will be a challenge. It'll take some time. Advocacy always takes time. Unfortunately, it's sort of a slow process. But one recommendation we have, and I know other states are looking at it, including Virginia and others, is this concept of the fine arts diploma seal, and at least making sure that kids are getting some sort of credit or recognition if they are what they refer to as a career arts student, meaning they take an arts course every year in high school. So making sure that there's sort of an incentive for them to do so is one strategy that I know we're also exploring with Oklahoma, and I've talked to the folks in Indiana about.
And I think that there's some, this is going to sound a little more conversational, but I'm pretty confident we could find the data. When I was in Chicago Public Schools and we were able to expand the graduation requirements to embrace the 4 arts disciplines at the time, we saw an increase, because it was just music and visual arts. When dance and theater were eligible for those credits, we saw an increase in offerings and in staffing for those 2 art forms as well. So I think there might be a case, Clyde, to the impact of the broader and stronger graduation requirements provide a better offering of the arts in those districts. Or schools.
I know that in Illinois too, Mario, they included in their ESSA plan like access and participation in arts education as part of their accountability system. They sort of put it on hold during the pandemic, but my understanding is that in the next year or so, we should see some data out of Illinois about, maybe how that has impacted things now that it's part of the accountability system as that fourth indicator.
This would be a situation that would be ideal for the arts education organizations to form a coalition like this one in the state. And we are seeing other states beginning to look at that. At least I've heard of things happening in Washington, Oregon, as they did in California, which is where I am. And so that coalition worked very well, was very effective in that way. And the other is to look for research. We know there's a lot of research that the arts have different benefits for students in terms of their attendance, effective measures, involvement in school, success academically as well. So you want to present that kind of research and also look into whether the inverse is true, the lack of arts resources and experiences having some detrimental effect on academic performance.
Excellent. I see we're just about at time. I think maybe there's one more from Katie. There was a question around, are there trainings available for people who would like to move into a district arts coordinator or supervisor role? And I know, at least from our perspective, each of the art form associations has leadership opportunities and leadership tracks. So like we have a supervision and administration division. It plays out a little differently across art forms, but there are leadership pathways. And then through the Arts Education Partnerships, AEP, there's a tri-annual or a quarterly district art supervisors convening. So I think you could reach out to your home art form and get more direction from any of us, and we'd be happy to share resources across organizations for you. I think we have a few slides to go over. We tried to cover as many bases in those Q&A as possible. We know there's a lot of great ideas and questions coming across, but we want to respect everyone's time as well. Ray?
Yep, I can take it from here, Mario. Thank you. I'm gonna put our slides back up. Oh, and of course it's going all the way to the top. Sorry, everyone. So we wanted to highlight some of the upcoming programs that all of the various associations are doing. And so here, the Educational Theater Association, they have their Theater and Education Conference coming up in Minneapolis, October 26th to 29th. There's also a listing here. You can see the links. And a lot of folks have been asking about being able to access links or the presentation, everything else. As folks have mentioned, we will be sharing everything out afterwards. So don't worry if you missed something, you can always rewatch it or get some of those links after the fact. But NAfME has some upcoming webinars. There's also information about their biennial Music Research and Teacher Education Conference. And then another webinar on advocating for federal funds in small school settings. The National Association for Media Arts Education has a monthly open webinar. The next one coming up on Thursday, September 12th, 7 to 8 Eastern. NAEA hosts a series of open studios as well as webinars each month. This open studio that's coming up on September 26th is free for like members and non-members. It's called Navigating ED&I, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in Unreceptive Environments, Strategies for Progress Amidst Resistance. So there's a bit.ly link there as well for you to access and be able to register for that. And as mentioned earlier, this is National Arts and Education Week, September 9th through 13th. So it starts the year off, the academic year. And so many of you are probably already participating. Maybe you've been posting, you've been accessing social media. I know at NAEA, we are also doing an activity or an action a day that you can participate in, one of them being coming to this webinar tonight. But you can go to @Americans4Arts for social media, and you can use the hashtags, hashtag ArtsEdWeek or hashtag ArtsEducation to be able to highlight or showcase the ways that arts education is, you know, supporting your students and also how you're supporting educators. And lastly, just thanking all of our panelists. We have contact info here for Amanda's whole team. And thank you, Amanda, for all that information. I know it was really fantastic and will be really supportive and helpful for our members at NAEA. If you have discipline-specific questions, we've also included a contact person or a contact point for each of the associations here. Some of the questions I think that were in the Q&A, you can actually direct specifically to some of the our association partners and be able to get answers directly that way. But I think with that, I will stop our share and thank again all of our panelists. The entire recording will be available online, or not online. It'll be available to all of our participants. We'll send it out, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight for the for this webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.